Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so I'm happy that the second week that the number of people wasn't too many people who thought, oh, this stuff is too technical, too dry, too abstract. I'm dropping the course. Okay, we have a printed schedule for the, like a syllabus, but don't think that I have to adhere sort of rigidly to it. I want to make sure that at least everybody gets a clear view of the organization or the system of chittas, of consciousness, before we go into the chaitasikas. So I'm going to do like a little review, and then we'll go into the section on the chittas that I didn't take last time. This is how we get from 80 chittas to, was it 121? Okay, so I think it would be helpful sort of to get an overview just on everything that we covered last week, to look at this table 1.9. And this is on page 70. Okay, and so you see we covered all of the 89 chittas last week. And of those 89 chittas, 81 are we call mundane or lokiya. That is, they pertain to this cycle of birth and death, to the cycle of samsara. Even though a lot of them are beyond the domain of our ordinary experience, but still, even those sublime or elevated types of chittas are still part of the fabric of samsara. Okay, so starting sort of at the bottom, we have the 12 unwholesome chittas, and we saw that there are 8. The unwholesome chittas are distinguished as such because they have the unwholesome roots, some combination of, or some of the unwholesome roots, greed, hatred, or delusion. And we saw that greed and hatred are mutually exclusive, though delusion is common to all of the unwholesome chittas. So delusion, also known as ignorance, is at the bottom of all unwholesome states of mind. So the 8 that are rooted in greed actually have both delusion and greed, but greed is more prominent. And of these 8, we saw that there are 4 associated with pleasant feeling or joy, and 4 associated with neutral feeling, which is called equanimity. And again, there are 4 that are accompanied by a wrong view, and 4 that don't have a wrong view. And again, there are 4 that arise spontaneously, sort of naturally, just through our natural inclination to obtain desirable things. And then 4 are called susankarika, prompted, which means that they arise when we are either urged by others to do something that involves indulging greed, or we persuade ourselves to do something that's motivated by greed. So if you take those 3 points of distinction, the associated feeling, then whether a wrong view is present or not, and whether the citta is prompted or spontaneous, then we get 8 unwholesome cittas. Okay, the cittas rooted in hatred, also called aversion, they also have delusion at the bottom. And these cittas are always accompanied by domanassa. That's an unpleasant mental feeling, some kind of displeasure. So whenever you get angry, or whenever you're resentful of others, or whenever you dislike something, if you look into your mind, how are you feeling? You see that the feeling is an unpleasant feeling. Okay, so the 2 cittas rooted in hate are distinguished simply whether they're prompted or spontaneous. Okay, then there are 2 unwholesome cittas which are rooted in strong delusion without the presence of either greed or hatred. So of these 2 cittas, one is the doubting citta, the citta in which there's some kind of spiritual doubt about spiritual matters. In the Buddhist terms, we would say it's doubting the Buddha, doubting the teaching, the Dharma, the teaching, doubting whether there is such a thing as an Aryan Sangha. And then the other unwholesome citta is called the citta accompanied by restlessness. Restlessness is present in all the unwholesome cittas, but there's one particular type in which the other unwholesome qualities, greed and hatred, are not present, but there's just this strong agitation or restlessness. Okay, so those are the unwholesome cittas. Then we had the 18 cittas that are called rootless, because they don't have any unwholesome roots. They don't have unwholesome roots, they don't have wholesome roots. And these rootless cittas include both include both resultants and functional cittas. The unwholesome resultants are the 5 types of momentary sense consciousness, that is, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. And then following the moment of sense consciousness, there's the moment of receiving consciousness, and then following that, the moment of investigating consciousness. Those are unwholesome resultants. Remember, the resultants are not unwholesome themselves, not wholesome themselves, but this is the result of unwholesome cittas. When unwholesome cittas, which create unwholesome karma, when that karma produces its result, the result takes the form of these unwholesome cittas. Then the wholesome, rootless cittas also include 5 types of sense consciousness, except these are the results of wholesome karma. So the unwholesome karma ripens in the sensory spheres by seeing unpleasant sights, hearing unpleasant sounds, smelling unpleasant odors, tasting unpleasant flavors, touching, feeling unpleasant bodily sensations. The wholesome cittas, one of the ways in which they ripen, producing their results, is by seeing pleasant sights, hearing pleasant sounds, smelling pleasant fragrances, tasting pleasant tasting pleasant foods, feeling pleasant textures, and then following the moment of sense consciousness comes the moment of receiving consciousness, and then the investigating consciousness for the wholesome side can be of two types. If it's just an ordinary agreeable sense object, the investigating consciousness is accompanied by neutral feeling. But if it's a really agreeable, delightful object that one is experiencing, then the investigating consciousness shouts out for joy with a joyful investigating consciousness. The investigating consciousness accompanied by joyful feeling. Okay, then we have the three kinds of rootless functional consciousness. So these are, we call them functional because they just perform these bare functions in the process of cognition. So one type of functional consciousness is called the 5 sense door adverting consciousness. That is, at the very, excuse me, at the very beginning of a process of consciousness, when an object comes knocking at one of the sense doors, there's one citta that arises, turning, it sort of turns what sense door is the object striking upon. And then that citta turns to the sense door. If it's a form at the eye, first of all, it turns to the eye. If it's, say, one hears a sound, it'll turn to the ear. It'll arise at the ear, turning to the sound. So that's called the 5-door adverting or turning consciousness. And that arises when there's a sense object appearing. But in the case when we're not attending to any of the 5 senses, but attending to our own ideas, thoughts, emotions, fantasies, judgments, and so on, similarly, there arises one moment that just turns to the mind door before taking up the object. That is called the mind door adverting consciousness. So that is a bare functional consciousness. It's not the result of karma, it's just part of the natural process of cognition. Okay, the third functional consciousness, and this is the one that I've never really understood very clearly, this is called the Arahat smiling consciousness. It's a functional consciousness that just causes arhats to smile about sense sphere phenomena. Okay, so that's the rootless. Then we come to, this should really be called the beautiful sense sphere types of consciousness, because all of the consciousness following the rootless, all of these states of consciousness are called beautiful kinds of consciousness. But these are the sense sphere beautiful. Yeah, here it's sense sphere beautiful consciousness. Okay, so we have 8 kinds of wholesome. Okay, now what makes consciousness, sense consciousness beautiful is that it's accompanied by beautiful roots, by non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And if you remember what we said, I think on Friday, the beautiful consciousness can be accompanied by at least non-greed and non-hatred. It's always accompanied by those 2 beautiful roots. But in the sense sphere, wholesome consciousness, or the sense sphere beautiful consciousness, 4 kinds are accompanied by knowledge or understanding, which is the root of non-delusion. And so in the wholesome types of beautiful consciousness, we have 4 kinds accompanied by knowledge, 4 kinds not accompanied by knowledge. The 4 kinds accompanied by knowledge have 3 roots: non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. The 4 kinds not accompanied by knowledge have non-greed and non-hatred. They don't have ignorance, just knowledge or understanding or wisdom is not present on that occasion. Okay, the wholesome consciousness in terms of feelings can have either joyful feeling, pleasant mental feeling. Joyful feeling is pleasant mental feeling. Or there are 4 kinds that have neutral feeling, what's called equanimity, equanimous feeling. And then the wholesome sense sphere consciousness can be prompted or spontaneous. So in that way, if you take those 3, whether with knowledge, without knowledge, whether joyful or neutral feeling, whether prompted or unprompted, we get 8 possible types of beautiful sense sphere, wholesome consciousness. And then there are 8 resultants, which are the mirrors of those 8 wholesome kinds of consciousness. The description is the same, it's just that the function is different. The wholesome types of consciousness create wholesome karma. The resultants experience the result or the ripening of the wholesome karma. Okay, then there are 8 kinds of functional beautiful consciousness. These 8 kinds of beautiful functional consciousness, these are exactly like the 8 kinds of wholesome consciousness, but these are the chittas that arise in the minds of arahats. And the reason why they're called functional for arhats is that these chittas don't create any karma. They're beautiful in that they have all of the wholesome factors, but because they don't create karma, they're not considered wholesome chittas, but beautiful functional chittas. Okay, so that takes care of the 24 kinds of beautiful sense sphere chittas. Okay, then we come to the next major sphere, which is called the fine material sphere. And following that, the immaterial sphere. Together, these are called the sublime chittas. Sublime means elevated, higher, superior. Okay, the fine material sphere chittas, these are the states of consciousness that occur. Let me put it this way. These are the kinds of consciousness that correspond to the 5 jhanas, the 5 meditative absorptions. And remember that in the Abhidhamma system, the jhanas, in the suttas we have 4 jhanas, but the Abhidhamma breaks down the first into 2 stages, or actually it's the second that it breaks down into 2 stages, because it distinguishes applied thought and sustained thought, or initial application and sustained application. And so we have 5 jhanas, and those are considered the wholesome chittas of the fine material sphere. So the 5 chittas that arise when a meditator enters the jhana, the meditative absorption. Then corresponding to these wholesome jhana chittas, there are the same kinds of resultant chittas. Fivefold, because each one corresponds to the 5 levels of the jhanas. And then there are 5 kinds of functional chittas. These are the chittas that arise in arhats when they sit in meditation and enter the jhanas. And we say arhats, that includes Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas. So they enter and experience the jhanas, but their jhanas don't create more karma that will generate more rebirths. And so they're called functional. And similarly, for those meditators who go beyond the jhanas and attain the 4 formless or immaterial meditative attainments, that's the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So at the level of those 4 meditative attainments, there are different chittas, and when they enter the attainment, those are the wholesome chittas. When those chittas produce their result, the result are the 4 resultant immaterial sphere chittas. And then when the arahats or Buddhas want to experience the formless or immaterial attainments, they will enter those meditative states. But again, their chittas don't create karma, and so they're called functional chittas. Okay, so all of these taken together make up the 81 kinds of mundane chittas, the 81 kinds of consciousness that arise in the sense sphere. And as I said several times last week, but I'll repeat it again, this is my personal opinion. This classification, I might be criticized by maybe some of the elders in Burma will say that I'm a rebel, that I don't understand Abhidhamma. But my opinion is that the scheme of chittas, it's not intended to be like an all-comprehensive classification of every possible type of mental state that can arise. But probably originally, the formulators of the Abhidhamma would be considering what are the important mental states from the standpoint of Buddhist spiritual aspirations and practice, and then they develop these different criteria. And so if we say, what is the citta of a scientist when he's making a new discovery in the domain of quantum physics, how does that fit into the scheme of chittas? I don't know. But perhaps the system is not, as I said, not intended to cover every possible state of mind that could arise. Okay, but now we come to the chittas which cover what is really the aim of this entire system of classification. In fact, the aim of the Buddha's dharma or path. This is like the ultimate aim is liberation from birth and death, liberation from samsara. And to reach liberation, one has to cultivate particular practice that culminates in liberation. And the practice proceeds through sila or moral conduct, then to samadhi, concentration, then to panya or wisdom. And when wisdom reaches its peak, its culmination, then it makes a breakthrough out of the mundane sphere to the supramundane. In other words, it penetrates and takes as its object the unconditioned Dharma, which is Nibbana. And those states of consciousness that break through to the ultimate truth are called the four supramundane paths. In Pali, they're called the Maggas. This is the path of stream entry, the path of once returning, the path of non-returning, not coming back into the sense sphere, and the path of arhatship. Each path consciousness cuts off particular set of defilements, and each path consciousness is immediately followed by a couple, 2 or 3 cittas that are the fruits of the path. Those are called in Pali the phala citta, the fruition states of consciousness. And so there are 4 paths, and corresponding to each path there is its respective fruition. So the fruit of stream entry, the fruit of the once returner, the fruit of the non-returner, the fruit of arhatship. And the paths and fruits, they both take as their object Nibbana or the unconditioned, but they have a different function. The path consciousness, its function is to cut off or weaken the defilements. The fruition consciousness experiences the bliss and freedom made possible by the elimination of those defilements. Okay, so we have 8. When we take the supramundane, 4 paths, 4 fruits, we have 8. And when we add those 8 to the 81, then we get the 89 cittas. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether there are any questions. But first there were several questions. Somebody gave me some questions in writing last time, so I'll take those first. And that gave me the idea that, like, if questions occur to you, maybe if you're embarrassed to ask them in front of the whole class, or they occur to you towards the end of the class, and there's no opportunity to ask, you could write them down on paper and then give them to me. Then I'll take them either during the same class or after or the next class. Okay, so let's take these questions first. Okay, when we were discussing the aggregates, and then you mentioned the rupa khandha, the aggregate of material form, you said that there were external material objects also known as rupa. Are those objects, external material objects, included in the rupa khandha, the aggregate of material form? The answer is yes. It's said that the material form includes whatever material form there is, internal, that would be relating to our physical body, and external. So the khandha or skandha is like a category for including all entities of that particular type. So the rupa khandha includes all material entities. The feeling aggregate includes all feelings, whether my own or others. And so for perception, mental formations, consciousness. But of course, the rupa that and that we're all sort of attached to most, I'm not particularly attached to this cup. Let's not mention the computer. But if it goes, it goes. But it's this body that we're usually most attached to. So that is sort of the strong object of clinging is the body. And then other material things like possessions can also be objects of clinging, but not as intense as the body. Okay, then the next question, it is a little bit outside the syllabus of Abhidhamma, but Okay, the Sankhara Khanda, does it not include the broader definition of sankharas as conditioned phenomena? Yeah, the word sankhara has different uses in the Buddhist texts. So there's the sankhara khanda, which are the volitional activities or mental activities, except for perception and feeling and consciousness, which are khandas of their own. And then sankhara is used in a more general sense to mean all conditioned phenomena. So we have to be careful to distinguish these meanings. Okay, next question. When arahats are described as having purely functional consciousness, how would the quality of compassion then relate to the Buddha? Do Buddhas and arahats still have the quality of metta, that's loving kindness, or have they let that go? Yeah, the Buddhas and arahats still have all of these four, we call divine qualities: loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. It's just that they're functional. It doesn't mean that they occur like automatic or mechanical functions like a machine. Of course, they're qualities of the heart. They're just functional in the sense that they don't generate more karma. And we're going to see which qualities belong to which states of consciousness in a future class. We'll be coming to that. Then the next question, it seems as though the cittas described in the Abhidhamma are a more microscopic delineation of the processes of dependent origination. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. And there's ways to explain dependent origination using the tools of the Abhidhamma. But that's a very, very technical and complicated subject. And one has to really learn just about everything else that comes in the earliest stages of Abhidhamma before we get to that. Okay, any other questions, especially about the scheme of the cittas? Yes, please. Yeah, take the mobile microphone.
Hello. Thank you for your teachings. I was wondering what differentiates the, for example, the wholesome karma. When you have a wholesome citta, that would that create the wholesome resultant cittas?
Yeah, it's the wholesome cittas that create the karma that will produce the wholesome resultants.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's the difference between, or what differentiates the resultant rootless versus the resultant with roots?
Yeah. We're going to get to that much later, but I'll just sort of anticipate the answer that the rootless resultants they differ in their function. So the rootless resultants, the main ones, are the 5 types of sense consciousness and the receiving and the investigating consciousness. Whereas the wholesome resultants, as we'll see, their primary function is to serve as that rebirth and subliminal consciousness in the next existence. We'll come to that over this course.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hello. So we have these resultant cittas; those are karmically determined.
Yeah.
The question is about how the non-resultant cittas are produced. Are they part of a non-karmic causality?
I see. You mean like the wholesome and unwholesome cittas?
Yeah, because the resultants are specifically results of previous cittas, but how do we produce the non-resultant cittas?
Yeah, there are many other conditioning, many factors condition them. It can be through, say, our previous habits. Like if I'm in the habit of, going to, let us say, not me, but okay, somebody who's in the habit of going to, what's it called, McDonald's? Okay, so when they're driving and they pass a McDonald's or see a McDonald's in the distance, then it will arise, this would be like greed-rooted chittas to enjoy a cheeseburger. And so then they'll drive into the McDonald's to enjoy the cheeseburger. Whereas, say if Venerable Jinchuan is driving past the McDonald's, then there wouldn't arise greed-rooted chittas for the McDonald's. And somebody has cultivated over time a lot of anger and hatred, and so for that person, then a little stimuli in the environment will condition the arising of chittas rooted in hatred. Okay, where somebody, on the other hand, say somebody gets introduced to Buddhism, then they enjoy coming into the Buddha hall and maybe bowing to the Buddha, and so then they go to another monastery and they look around and they ask, where's the Buddha hall? And then they go to the Buddha hall, and with a wholesome citta, they bow down to the Buddha. So this is past habit. Then another factor, it's the influence of friends. So that's why in the suttas, the Buddha puts a lot of emphasis on avoiding association with papa mitra. These are bad friends, and associating with kalyana mitra, good friends. So these are just a few of the conditioning factors. Could even be something like the weather. When the sun is bright and the sky is clear and the temperature is mild, then we have maybe joyful chittas will arise. Whereas when there's cloudy weather, rain, and then there might be chittas rooted in aversion. Any other question? Okay, so now we can get to that question. You see, we have 8 supramundane chittas here, and then in the book, this table is on page 70. On page 71, we have a section on the 121 types of consciousness. Okay, how do we get to this 121 kinds of consciousness? This is a somewhat tricky point. And so you have to pay careful attention, and it can be a little confusing. So I have to be careful in my explanations as well. Okay, first, meditators are divided into 2 basic types according to the way they reach the supramundane path. These 2 are called samatha yanika and vipassana yanika. Okay, the samatha yanika, the word samatha means tranquility or calmness, and it's really referring to samadhi, strong concentration. And of course the word yanika is based on the word yana, which means vehicle. So same word as in Mahayana. And then ika means one who takes that vehicle, one who travels in that vehicle. So the samatha yanika is one who sort of rides in the vehicle that emphasizes samadhi. And this meditator will achieve the jhana first, any of the 5 jhanas. And then on the basis of that jhanic attainment, they'll develop insight, vipassana. And so when they reach the path will occur at a level of concentration that corresponds to the level of jhana that they used as the basis for developing insight. Okay, so let us suppose that we have a meditator who attains the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, and they decide that they want to use that third jhana as the foundation for the development of insight. And so they'll enter the third jhana, they'll stabilize it, make sure it lasts a certain duration of time so that it has strength. Then they'll come out from the jhana and they develop their insight. Okay, and now they've been practicing insight over a long time, and so the insight already has already gathered a great deal of strength. So now their insight is at the point where it's almost ready to break through. And so they've based the insight, the practice of insight, on the third jhana. And when they reach the path will occur at a level of concentration that corresponds to the third jhana. And so we call their attainment, will be called a supramundane or world-transcending third jhana. And this is possible with any of the 5 jhanas. So any of the 5 jhanas can be used as a basis for insight. And then when one uses that jhana as a basis for insight, and then when the insight breaks through to the path, then the path occurs at a level corresponding to that of the basic jhana, the jhana used as a basis. And so we speak of a first jhana path of stream entry, a second jhana path of stream entry, a third jhana path of stream entry, a fourth jhana path of stream entry, and a fifth jhana path of stream entry. And so the paths, the chittas of the path will occur at the level of one or another of the 5 jhanas. And then the path is followed immediately by the fruit, and the fruit will occur at the level of the same jhana. And so if a meditator attains the path with a first jhana path citta, then the fruit will be a first jhana fruit citta. And similarly with the second, third, fourth, and fifth. If it's a fifth jhana path citta, it will be followed by a fifth jhana fruit citta. Okay, so we have 5 the 5 jhanas can occur in association with each of the 4 paths. So that will yield 4 by 5, 20 possibilities. So 20 possible path chittas. And then we also have the 5 jhanas occurring at the level of the 4 fruits. And so we have 20 possible fruit chittas. And so 20 plus 20. Any math majors here? $20 plus 20 is 40, right? And then these 40 are replacing the 8 supramundane chittas, because the 8 have been broken down more finely. And then we had the 81 mundane chittas. So that equals 121 chittas. Okay, so, and this is where it's important to avoid confusion. We have 2 types of jhanas: fine material sphere jhanas, and these are now called the supramundane jhanas. These are the jhanas of the paths and fruits. And so, in terms of the level of consciousness, that is the intensity of concentration, the depth of concentration, they're the same. That is why they're both called first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. But there are important differences between them. And some of the differences are mentioned in the explanatory guide. This is on page 73. Okay, maybe I should take, we don't want to leave, before I come to the differences, I don't want to leave the Vipassana Yanika out in the cold. So let's take the Vipassana Yanika. Okay, so the Vipassana Yanika, this meditator does not attain the fine material sphere jhana, but with a lesser degree of concentration goes directly into the practice of insight. Of course, the insight doesn't arise at once, but this meditator will attend mindfully to the changing phenomena of body and mind. So, for example, being aware of the breathing, the rise and fall of the abdomen, whatever kinds of states of mind arise, whatever bodily and mental feelings arise. The meditator just notes them, lets them go, and observes the next one that arises. And so as the concentration is deepening, the meditator gains a very, very strong degree of concentration, but it's not fixed on one object as for the jhanas, but the concentration is steady, unshaken, but the object is always changing, moment by moment. And as the insight deepens, then the degree to which the meditator can note the changing processes, the rising and falling away of phenomena, increases. And so the level of samadhi is almost like that of the jhana, but the mind is not fixed on one object, but is observing the constantly changing flow of experience. Okay, then when the concentration reaches when the insight reaches a certain peak of maturity, this meditator makes the breakthrough to the path. And when this meditator reaches the path, then it's said that their path and fruition consciousness occurs at the level of the first supramundane jhana. So even though they didn't attain the mundane jhana, but when the citta sort of makes that jump from the mundane to the supramundane, it fixes or focuses on nibbana, and that level of concentration is equivalent to that of the first jhana. Okay, so now we can look on page 73. So the paragraph begins, nevertheless, no matter what explanation is adopted, for the bare insight meditator, that's the vipassana yanika, the one who makes insight the vehicle. For the bare insight meditator and the jhana meditator alike, all path and fruition cittas are considered types of consciousness. They are so considered because they occur in the mode of closely contemplating their object with full absorption, and because they possess the jhana factors with an intensity corresponding to their counterparts in the mundane jhanas. Okay, but there are several differences, and this is the way they differ. First, the mundane jhanas take as their object, maybe the word concept is not good, but they take as their object, let's take something like a visible form, like the kasina, the circular disc that I mentioned the other day, the blue kasina. It would be like a visualized blue form. Or the mindfulness of breathing, it will be a particular visualized object that arises based on the sensation of the breath. Okay, so that is the object of the mundane jhana, but the supramundane jhanas, the jhanas of the paths and the fruits, take nibbana as their object. Okay, secondly, the mundane jhanas merely suppress the defilements, but they don't touch the underlying tendencies to those defilements. So that's why if the meditator is not careful and not diligent, if they fall away from the jhana or neglect their practice of jhana, they can reach, if they're exposed to certain stimulation, then those defilements can arise again. And the Visuddhimagga or the commentaries, they give a story to illustrate this. It's said that in Sri Lanka, this would be centuries ago, there was a young monk who had mastered the jhanas, but he didn't go on to develop his insight. And he even had supernormal powers, psychic powers, so that he could fly through the sky. And so one day he was using his psychic power, he was flying through the sky and flying over the rice fields. And in the rice fields there were the young girls were, I guess, plucking the rice, harnessing the rice. and singing these songs. And so as he flew over the rice fields, he heard the songs of the young girls coming up into the range of his hearing. He thought, what is that? Oh, very, very lovely sound. I should go see where it's coming from. Then he came down to the ground and he saw a young girl picking the rice, and then his defilement of sensual desire arose, and then he left the monk's life and fell in love with her, and they went off together happily ever after. Okay, so that is a second difference. Okay, so the mundane jhanas merely suppress the defilements, they leave their seeds intact, but the jhanas of the path eradicate defilements so they can never arise again. A third difference is that the mundane jhanas lead to rebirth in the fine material realm of existence. The fine material jhana generates the karma of the fine material realm, and so it will bring rebirth into the fine material realm. And so the fine material jhanas will contribute to the continuation of existence in samsara if the jhana is not accompanied by wisdom, or if it doesn't lead to the development of wisdom. Whereas the jhanas of the path cut off the fetters, and thus they bring liberation from the round of birth and death. Okay, and then fourth, whereas in the mundane jhanas, there's some degree of wisdom or knowledge is present, but in the mundane jhanas, the samadhi is much more powerful, the concentration. Whereas in the supramundane jhanas, in the path and the fruit, wisdom and concentration are balanced. They arise sort of as like twins, an equal pair. So that concentration fixes the mind on the object, which is nibbana, and then wisdom fathoms or penetrates the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so that takes us now to the end of the discussion of the chittas. And if there's any questions, again, that have arisen from this explanation, and please, again, feel welcome to bring them up. Okay.
I'm just wondering, in the Theravada chanting, they sometimes say the 4 pairs and the 8 kinds of noble beings.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, is that what it's referred to by the beings who are kind of have the path?
Yeah.
Chitta?
Yeah.
And then the fruit chitta. So essentially the 8 kinds of noble beings, the first 4 path noble beings are very, very momentary.
Yeah. That, you see, there seems to be it's an important point, a difference in the understanding of the path attainers from a sutta point of view and from an Abhidhamma point of view. It seems that the suttas are not dealing with these types of people in terms of single moment chittas. So it seems in the sutta system, at a certain point, one reaches a stage of irreversibility where one is bound to reach the actual supramundane path. And so one is considered then a person who has attained the path, but that status as a path attainer is extended in time. Whereas the Abhidhamma is looking only at that single moment, which is the actual breakthrough moment of the path. So the sutta, you could say, has a temporally extended conception of the path, or of the person on the path. Whereas the Abhidhamma is looking at the path from a more microscopic perspective of that one moment of consciousness that constitutes the breakthrough. Yes, please. And good if the people who ask the questions, if you say your name, then I'll remember the next, hopefully we'll remember the next time.
My name is Jerry.
Jerry?
Yeah. This may be from my ignorance, but if you're in nirvana, what is there to contemplate about the Four Noble Truths? So that those...
Yeah, that's a rather technical question, but let me try to put it simply, without taking a lot of time with explanation. With the path, what the path does, it takes Nibbana as the object when it's not actually understanding the Four Noble Truths in the path itself. But the path attainment gives one access to the third Noble Truth, which is, the third Noble Truth is really Nibbana. So from that standpoint, after going through the path and fruit, one could look back, and then one really understands that the five aggregates are the truth of dukkha. And one really understands that craving is the origin of dukkha. And one really understands now through experience that the Noble Eightfold Path, which one has practiced, is the way to liberation from dukkha.
Craving that you might contemplate is pre-nibbana craving?
It's craving in general, but one sees, I guess in one's own experience, it would be the pre-nibbana craving, yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, I'm Wendy. I have a question about the wholesome resultant rootless chitta.
Rootless chitta, yeah.
Yeah, wholesome resultant. So I'm just curious to know why the eyes, ears, nose, tongue have the feeling of a neutral feeling, whereas the body has joy and all that. Why is that?
Yeah. Yeah. You see, this is referring to just that one moment in which there's a direct consciousness of the object. So, at the very moment, say, that one sees a form, it's said that there's some distance between the form, or that the impact of the form on the eye is not so strong. And similarly, with the impact of sounds on the ear, odors on the nose, tastes on the tongue, the impact is not so strong. And so that feeling in that moment of sense consciousness is a neutral feeling. But it's said that the impact of objects, like physical objects on the body, is strong. So the feeling with body consciousness is either painful or pleasant. But this is where confusion can arise. You see, in the conscious process, which extends, you could see from the diagram, that table on page 155, that it extends over 17 chittas. Now, later in that process, there will arise the javana stage, in which there's some reaction to the sense object. And it's in that reaction to the sense object that there can arise pleasant feeling, joyful feeling, or unpleasant feeling, displeasure. So last week I used the example of somebody who loves ice cream, and so they get the ice cream, they take a spoon of ice cream and put it into their mouth. So the moment of tasting consciousness has the neutral feeling, but then in that series, there'll come the javana stage in which they're appreciating the flavor of the ice cream. Then, if it's the ice cream flavor they like, joyful feeling will arise. And so it seems that one is experiencing the joyful or pleasant feeling with the taste of the ice cream. But from the microscopic analysis in the Abhidhamma, the tongue consciousness has neutral feeling, but later in that process, the joyful feeling or pleasant feeling arises that takes the same taste as its object. And if it's the flavor of ice cream one doesn't like, or maybe one tastes bitter gourd. Do you know the bitter gourd? Maybe it's an acquired taste, but if when you first taste it, okay, it seems that an unpleasant feeling has arisen with tongue consciousness, but again, the consolation, the tongue consciousness is neutral feeling, but it's the processing of the taste in the javana stage that brings the feeling of displeasure. Yes, please.
This may just be adding, it may be understandable already, but I was thinking of an example that happened to me once where I picked up what I thought was a salt cellar, and it was sugar.
Yeah.
And I took a taste of it and simply didn't know what it was. I mean, there was a sensation, but there was no sense of what it was for a moment or three.
Yeah. Okay, please. Did somebody else have a... Yeah, please.
Okay. So my name is Mina.
Nina?
Mina.
Mina.
So my question is, it seems like after reading page 72 and 73, I get the impression that does and can the practice of cultivation using the sutta system be able to bypass all 5 mundane jhanas level and jump to the first jhana in the supramundane stage?
Using the sutta system?
Yeah, because it feels like, because when I first read on page 72, it starts with all meditators reach the supramundane path.
Yeah.
The last two sentences of that paragraph, I was under the impression that they were talking about something that doesn't require meditation. But then after Jing Chuanshu asked that question, I thought that maybe it's referring to the people who are using the sutta system, like meaning not the Abhidhamma system. Does that make any sense?
No, sutta system versus Abhidhamma system is a way of interpretation or analysis, not a way of practice.
Oh, okay.
But then the way you rephrase the question, that makes sense, and that is, it's possible to bypass the mundane jhanas. This is the way of practice of the Vipassana Yanika. This one here doesn't attempt to develop the mundane jhanas, but they will go directly, say, using the system of the Satipatthana Sutta in order to develop first mindfulness and clear comprehension, and then through mindfulness and clear comprehension, that will lead into the development of insight. And so they are going sort of directly developing insight without first developing the samadhi to the level of the jhanas in that particular way. Yes, please, and take a microphone. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks. My name is Roberta. I want to know, I was taught some version of this a while ago, and my teacher used the word outflows. I'm wondering if that maps at all onto the process of perception, because what I'm noticing from these other responses, something I experience a lot, where there's a moment, especially if something is intensely negative or positive in my mind, but the moment of impact, there's a neutral feeling actually, and then later on, the mind starts analyzing it and putting it into, I should be angry or I should be happy about this. But I'm noticing how there's like that chart on page 155, how it's breaking down that initial moment into a lot of small moments. So it is an outflow. I don't know if that makes sense here, if I'm trying to map something else on, but I'm trying to get at this moment that seems almost just like a pure moment of suchness. And then all this mental...
I think maybe this will become clearer as we go on, when we come to the cognitive process and look into it in greater detail. So far, I referred to the cognitive process only so that we could understand some of the rootless chittas, but we're going to take it up later in this program.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like now to get into the next chapter. This is the chapter on, it's called the Chaitasikas. These are the mental factors. Because a citta is, we might call it, a package deal. Or it's a little bit maybe like getting a box of chocolates. In that you have the box, and inside there will be many pieces of chocolate. I'm getting a painful bodily feeling suddenly. Okay. The chittas, what we call the chittas, again, like the box, the chittas might be compared to the box in which the chocolates are contained. And then the chocolates in the box are like the mental factors that make up the citta. So each citta is a complex entity made up of many, many constituents. And those constituents are, in Pali we have the word Chaitasika, which means mental factor. The citta itself, its function is basically to be aware of the object, to know the object. Even knowing is not good. To experience the object, we could say. We could say that the citta minds the object. Like, we use the word mind as a verb. Like the store owner tells his son, I have to go out, will you mind the store? Okay, so the citta, its function is to mind the object. But the citta is accompanied by a whole group of mental factors, which each mental factor has its own role to play in knowing the object, in experiencing the object. Okay, so we can look at the introductory verse in the chapter on the mental factors. This is on page 76. Maybe, like we did last week, we'll read the verse in Pali together, and then I'll translate and explain. Eku pada nirodhacha ekalambana vatuka cheto yuta vipanyasa dhamma cetasika mata. Okay, so ekupada means the same arising, one arising. And then the eka goes with nirodha too. One cessation, the same cessation. Then eka lambana means one object, the same object. And then vatuka refers to the base, which I'll explain. So cheto yuta, those are the factors that are associated with or that are connected with the citta. And there are dvipanyasa, 52 of these. So these are what are known as chaitasikas. So in the Pali Abhidhamma, there are 52 chaitasikas or mental factors, and with any particular citta, all of the mental factors have the same arise at the same time as that citta. And when the citta ceases, they all cease simultaneously with the citta. So they have one arising, one cessation. Then the mental factors will take the same object as the citta. If the citta is taking the form as the object, a visible form, the chaitasikas take the form as the object. If it's a sound, they'll take the sound as the object, and so for all of the other objects. If it's a mental idea, that the citta is sort of focused inwardly, taking a mental idea, then the chaitasikas take that idea as their object. And then they have one base, the same base. The base will be the eye, ear, nose, tongue, physical body. And then for purely inner mental processes like thinking, reflecting, and so on, it's said that the base is the heart base. We're going to come to that subject later. But for now, in regard to the chaitasikas, all that's important to know is that they take the same object and same base as the cittas. Okay, so sort of concise definition of the chaitasikas we have in the guide here. The chaitasikas are mental phenomena that occur in immediate conjunction with the citta, and they assist the citta by performing more specific tasks in the total act of cognition. The mental factors cannot arise without the citta. Citta is sort of like the boss. The chaitasikas are like the assistants. So the mental factors can't arise without the citta, and the citta can't arise without chaitasikas, without the mental factors. Then the commentaries explain the relationship between the citta and the chaitasikas to be like that between a king and his retinue. Oh, so you say, in those days they say the king is coming, but the king doesn't come alone, but he's always accompanied by his attendants. And so analogously with the citta, it's always accompanied by a team or a multitude of chaitasikas. Okay, and as I said, in the Theravada or Pali Abhidhamma, there are 52 mental factors. Now what's interesting, maybe later we'll look at it, out of curiosity, I looked into the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, which also it uses a similar scheme of citta and chaitasikas, But they have a different way of organizing the Chaitasikas and some difference of opinion in the way the Chaitasikas are associated with the Chittas. So I don't think we should take the analysis or explanation of Chaitasikas to be something that has absolute authority, but just see that different Buddhist schools investigated these mental factors, basically very similar groups of mental factors, but they just had different ways of assigning and classifying them. Okay, now, among the mental factors, we have three main groups. One, the first is called the ethically variable factors. These are mental factors that can be unwholesome, wholesome, resultant, or functional, depending on the chittas that they are associated with. So they're variable. They're fairly constant, but they change their character according to what they associate with. A little bit like that kind of lizard, what is it called? Chameleon. If it's on green leaves, it turns green. If it goes onto the brown soil, it turns brown. Okay, the ethically variable factors are subdivided into two groups. One are called the universals, that's sabbacitta sadharana, which means those that are common to all the chittas. These seven are present in every state of consciousness. They're indispensable for the citta to function. The others are called I use the translation occasionals. The Pali is pakinika, which means that they can be present and also they can be absent. They're not universally present. Okay, so let us go now into the universals, and there are 7 universals. So let's recite them together in Pali. We skipped the word kattang. Oh, so everybody recited it. It just means how. So how are there 52? So it begins with the 7. Paso, Vedana, Sanya, Chaitana, Ekagata, Jivatindriyam, Manasikaro Chati, Sati Me Chaitasika, Sabachita Sadharana, Nama. Okay, so the 7 factors are contact, feeling, perception, volition, one-pointedness, the mental life faculty, and attention. So these 7 mental factors are called universals. They're common to every state of consciousness. Okay, we could look at the explanations now given in the explanatory guide. And this explanatory guide, it draws upon a scheme that's used often in the commentaries for analyzing any kind of dharma. I wonder whether they have the same scheme in, maybe preserved in Chinese through the Sanskrit analytical system, commentarial or Shastra system. The 4 methods of definition are lakkhana, which means the characteristic, rasa, which means the function, pachupatana, which means appearance or manifestation, And then the fourth is padhatthana, which means basis or proximate cause, or underlying condition. And I have to say, I don't find that this scheme is always applied very successfully. Sometimes it seems you sort of have to work around it. Sometimes it's not all that helpful, sometimes a little misleading. So I'll take what's useful in the scheme and pass over some of the less useful things. Okay, the first of these universal mental factors, in Pali it's called phassa, which we translate as contact. And this is, the word phassa is based on the verb pusati, which means literally to touch. And so literally contact is touching, but it's not physical touching. And contact is not the object striking on the sense faculty. But the way contact is explained in these suttas, it's explained as the coming together of consciousness with the object and the sense faculty. So the way I understand contact, the way I interpret it to myself, it is like the sense faculty is like a door, and sometimes they're called in the Buddhist text the doors of cognition. In fact, the Chinese have this too, man, right? Yeah, man, yeah. Okay, so it's like the consciousness is going out through the door in order to meet the object. Or we could say the object is coming through the door in order to meet the consciousness. And so when they come together, when the mind or consciousness meets the object through the sense door, it's as if the mind, sort of metaphorically, it's as if the mind is touching the object, or as if the object is touching the door. And so that event of the meeting of mind and object is contact. Yeah, you take the microphone.
So in this coming together, the consciousness, the word is usually vijnana, isn't it? Not
in the
chitta.
The suttas use vijnana, yeah.
Do we distinguish that then
no.
chitta in any way?
No.
Okay.
We could also say this is the chitta meeting the object. It's just that in the suttas, it's explained in terms of the arising of the 6 types of vijnana, and then from vijnana to contact, and then to feeling. And in the suttas, chitta is used in different contexts, whereas the Abhidhamma gives the primacy to the word chitta. So here we'll use chitta. But it's really, in practical terms, it's the same. So we say that the contact is the mental factor by which consciousness or chitta mentally touches the object that has appeared. And so that is what serves as a condition for all of the other mental factors to arise. So using this defining device, the characteristic of contact is mental touching. Its function is impingement. It's manifested as the concurrence, the occurring together of consciousness, sense faculty, and object. And its proximate cause is an objective field that has come into focus. Okay, so that is contact. Then the next mental factor is feeling or vedana. So every state of consciousness has some feeling, even though it seems that you're not feeling anything, it just means you're not feeling either joyful or saddened. But there's some feeling which is present in every citta, that whenever the mind experiences an object, that experience of the object has some tone, either a pleasant tone, a painful tone, or a neutral tone, neither one nor the other. And now we translate Vedana as feeling, but feeling here, it's not the same as the English word emotion. Probably from an Abhidhamma perspective, emotion would be a complex phenomena in which there's feeling, but various other mental factors sort of woven together. So Vedana, I use the expression, it's the affective tone, or the felt, maybe better, the felt tone of an experience. I think the rest of the explanation here, I'm not so happy with it. Okay, so there's feeling, then there's the next mental factor, universal mental factor, is perception. So perception plays the role of the perceiving the qualities of the object. So maybe we could see the role of perception maybe most conspicuously, say when we meet a person for the first time, then we take note of, say, the face of that person, their physical characteristics. And then if we run across that person in the street or at a meeting, maybe even several years later, then we recognize them. And the reason we can recognize them is because perception has played that role of sort of picking up the distinctive features of that person's face. So it's said that the function of perception is to make a sign as a condition for perceiving again on a later occasion. That's the same. Or its function is recognizing what has been previously perceived. And it's compared to a carpenter that, I guess this was done in ancient India, when they have different kinds of wood for making different objects. They would put a mark on the piece of wood so that they know which boards of wood to use for which purposes. So that is like the initial function of perception. And then perception functions prominently in recognition. So that is like the carpenter looking at the mark to see what kind of wood he has. Okay, the next universal mental factor is volition. And the Pali word for this is chaitana. And chaitana is, we say, it's the volitional aspect of cognition. And its characteristic is the state of willing. And now, in the suttas, the Buddha specifies that chaitana or volition is the main factor, the factor that's responsible for creating karma. There's a citta, I think it's Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Sixes. It could be Sutta 61 or 63. It's not that I have such a fabulous memory, but I've had to refer to this passage hundreds, well, maybe not hundreds, but dozens and dozens of times, so I know the sutta number. So the Buddha says, Chaitanaham bhikkhave kamang vadami, that it is volition that I speak of as karma. And this raises the sort of tricky question from the Abhidhamma standpoint. What about the cittas that don't create karma, like the resultant cittas and the functional cittas, the rootless functional cittas? No karma is created by those cittas, but Chaitana, volition, is a universal mental factor. So what the commentators, the Abhidhamma commentators say is that volition also has the function of coordinating all of the other mental factors within the citta for the purpose of performing their respective tasks. Yeah, please. There's a microphone down the line.
So I've heard in the past that on the wheel of dependent origination you can cut through it almost any place. But if you cut through before Vedana or you cut through before Sanya, then you will have a state of consciousness without those aspects. Does that make sense?
No.
So cutting through the wheel of dependent origination is breaking off the karma, right? And at each point of the wheel, some aspect of an aggregate is
actually
performed.
what one does in breaking through the wheel, the only place where you really cut it off is at ignorance.
Oh.
Yeah.
But so there's no time that you can catch it after
You can
that?
catch and sort of stop it from building up at earlier stages, particularly in the transition from feeling to craving.
Right.
Yeah. But to cut it, it has to be cut at ignorance.
At the root.
Yeah.
So that...
Yeah.
So then it just cuts off all of the rest.
But I think we have to keep the questions
to this.
Restricted to the Chaitasikas. And I'm going to give a lecture, by the way, on Sunday, was it March 25th? Yeah, on March 25th here it's in the Great Buddha Hall, Sunday evening. Excuse me? On that topic. Yeah, I'm cutting through dependent origination.
We had a discussion in Doug Power's class preparatory for this, a debate going back and forth about this volitional aspect, mental factor, of what is it that makes a volitional chaitana accepted or not accepted? That is there any choice, or is it just automatic? If the volition is there, if the volition is to eat a bowl of ice cream, you just do it because the volition is there, or can there be some way to not do it? And then what's not doing it? The question was of agency, of course.
Yeah, I think that's getting somewhat, or maybe save that question till the point where I finish going through the Chaitasikas that I'm going to cover today.
I'm going to try and write it down.
Well, write it down. Because I would like to go pretty straight through the Chaitasikas rather than, get detoured into it. When it comes time for asking questions, then I'll ask them. I'm just trying to see. I had opened up, I had a file, it was a PDF. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, I had taken the Visuddhimagga also has an explanation of the Chaitasikas. Okay, here it is. Okay, this is the Visuddhimagga on Chaitana. Its characteristic is the state of willing. Its function is to accumulate. That is referring to the accumulation of karma. It is manifested as coordinating. Actually, it's obvious that the explanation taken here is taken from the Visuddhimagga, so that doesn't add anything helpful. Anyway, this is what is said by the Abhidhamma commentators, that in the karmically active chittas, the Chaitana volition is what creates the karma, but in non-karmic states of consciousness, volition is still present with the function of coordinating the other mental factors in performing the task of that chitta. Okay, the fifth universal Chaitasika is one-pointedness, ekaggata, which is explained as the unification of the mind on the object. And this might be a bit surprising because you might be sitting there thinking, like, I've been sitting in meditation trying to keep my mind on the breath. I've been going at it for 45 minutes and my mind is still scattered, and yet they're trying to tell me one-pointedness is a feature of every chitta? What's going on here? Okay, so what is said is that in every chitta there is one Chaitasika, one mental factor, which is responsible for fixing or focusing that chitta on the object. And that mental factor is ekaggata, one-pointedness. Now, even when the mind is distracted and agitated and scattered, the mind still has an object. And so there is still one-pointedness which is fixing on that object. But because the mind is agitated, the object is changing from chitta to chitta, or from one process of chittas to the next process of chittas. And so because the mind is always wavering and agitated and distracted, so the factor of one-pointedness is very weak in those chittas, but it's still present. And what one is doing, probably this we could say is the reason why, maybe you have this experience, say you're focusing on the breath and so many distracting thoughts are coming and you keep on going back, in breath, out breath, in breath, out breath. Then suddenly it seems now the mind is fixed. It's sort of settled down and fixed on the breath. So you're following in, out, in, out, in, out. What's happening, even though the mind had been distracted, but you keep on bringing the mind back despite the distraction. Focus on the in-breath, focus on the out-breath. And so as you're doing that, the factor of one-pointedness is gaining strength. It's sort of getting fortified. And then when it gets fortified enough, then the mind is able to settle on the breath. And then when that one-pointedness becomes really strong, then it induces samadhi, even eventually to the level of the jhanas. Okay, so this is a way to understand how unification of mind is present in every citta. Okay, the next mental factor universal mental factor is something called the mental life faculty. Because there's also a bodily or physical life faculty. Okay, so it's said that this mental life faculty has the characteristic of maintaining the associated mental states. The function of making them occur is manifested as the establishing of their presence. Okay, then the seventh universal mental factor is called in Pali manasikara. Kara means activity, and manasi means in the mind. So this is, we translate it as attention, and it's the mental factor that is responsible for the mind turning to the object. So every citta, even these little momentary cittas, each one turns to its object. And by turning to the object, it is what makes the object present to the citta. We can see the function of manasikara maybe most conspicuously, most obviously. Say, okay, earlier this afternoon, before I came to the class, I was sitting in the kitchen of the cottage where I'm staying. I had the door open and I was reading. Then I heard a little sound like that. So then I look up and a peacock is walking through the door. Okay, so it was with the hearing of that my attention turned from the book to look up, what's that? And then I saw the peacock coming in. I said, get out! Because if I don't say get out, then I'll have maybe a cleaning up job to do later. Okay, so you could see like the function of attention is clearest when there's something that suddenly a new object catches our attention. But even if we're focused on the same object, but in each citta, this mental function of attention is present, turning the mind to that object again and again and again. Okay, so that is manasikara. Its function is said that it's the mental factor responsible for the mind turning to the object. It makes the object present to consciousness, and it's said to conduct the mind and the other mental factors toward the object, and it yokes the other mental factors to the object. Okay, so those are the 7 universal factors. And one thing, sometimes it seems that these mental factors, some of them seem very, very similar, and we wonder, like, what is the distinction between them, and how do we distinguish them? There's a work in Pali called the Milinda Panha, the Questions of King Milinda, in which a simile is used to illustrate how these mental factors come together in the cittas and how they're so similar, and yet the Buddha has distinguished them. It's said to be, it's like a cook prepares a soup using different spices, cumin, turmeric, chili pepper, black pepper. What are some other spices used? Coriander, mustard seeds, and it has the soup. And now when you taste the soup, all of these blend together with one flavor. But somebody with an extremely sharp sense of taste could distinguish what is contributed by the cumin, what is contributed by the coriander, what by the turmeric. Of course, the chili is pretty easy to tell. What by the mustard seeds, and so on. Yeah, so the Buddha is one who's like that person with the very sharp sense of taste. He was able to look into the mind and distinguish what is contact, what is feeling, what is perception, what is volition, what is attention, what is one-pointedness. Jerry?
Yeah. Okay. I could use your example of the spices in the soup. It seems to me that this is the third or fourth time I've read these universals, but it seems like they're contextual, so that does feeling determine perception, or does perception influence feeling, so that chili may taste one way, but depends what else it's mixed with.
Yeah. You see, in different cognitive processes, like series of cittas, different chaitasikas might be more prominent. In every citta, they occur together. But in different cognitive processes, one might be more prominent, and that will influence later cognitive processes in which other factors will be more prominent. So to give an example, the feeling and perception always arise in every citta, but on some occasion, maybe the feeling is more prominent. Okay, let's say I come outside and I get a nice feeling, pleasant feeling coming from the warmth, say if it's a warm day. Okay, then that will influence me to look up at the sun, and I see that the sun is shining brightly. So in that way, feeling is sort of conditioning the arising of perception. On other occasions, maybe perception, say somebody likes paintings by Picasso, and so they go to an art museum, they enter a hall, and then they look at a painting, and then they recognize that's a Picasso. So that is mainly the work of perception, and then that will bring a feeling of a pleasant feeling. That's valuable.
It seems to me a little bit more contextual than that. So let's say I have skin cancer and I feel the warm sun. My perception is that that's not a great thing.
Yeah, of course. There's I just gave one example. It's not intended to cover everything.
No.
It's the case that feelings and perception are grouped as the second skandhas, and cognitions and volitions are grouped as the third skandhas.
No, perception is the third skandha.
Oh.
Yeah. The Vedana feeling is the second skandha. Perception is the third.
So sometimes cognition is also translated, cognition is the third skandha. Sometimes in different translations.
Yeah, different translators will yeah, this is a matter of translation. But I prefer to use perception for sanya.
What would be the Chinese translation for volition?
For volition, is it se or she?
Si. Oh, okay.
I think the old text used a se with the first tone.
Si, okay.
Though now it's come to mean thought.
Okay.
Thinking, like se way.
Okay, sorry. Volitions.
Yeah, so that is the fourth?
No, sorry. I have actually another question.
Did you say the fourth skandha or the third?
No, he says the fourth.
The fourth. Oh, as a skandha, it's shing. Yeah. Shing. Yeah. The fourth skandha is shing. Yeah.
Also, another question regarding the jhana.
Yeah.
We have five jhana altogether, and to me, the fifth one sounds very suddenly appealing. So,
it what?
Maybe someone.
You explained that before.
You have explained before.
He's wondering about why there's 5 jhanas rather than 4 jhanas.
I explained that on Friday because, you see, in the sutta scheme, to go from the first to the second, one eliminates vitaka and vichara, initial thought and sustained thought. One eliminates them simultaneously. But the Abhidhamma distinguishes, what the Abhidhamma says, that it's possible to eliminate initial thought and then go to a meditative absorption in which there's still sustained thought. So in that way, by more finely distinguishing the mental factors that are eliminated, one gets five jhanas. Okay, maybe if one more question, or maybe your question, let's come back to it. So I'll take that. About your discussion about volition.
Yeah, I was thinking, if there, I'm trying to come at it this way.
It's not on.
Oh, my name's Ernie.
Vernon? Ernie. Ernest, okay.
If there's two people,
Yeah.
and they both have this structure of volition to eat a bowl of ice cream,
Yeah.
and one eats it and one doesn't,
Yeah.
if the one who doesn't, is that because they have another Chaitasika, like maybe their doctor told them your arteries will get clogged up if you eat ice cream, so they have a positive reason not to eat it?
Of course, yeah.
Or is there something like, is there something else like will or something? Well, I want to eat it, but I won't. How do you deflect? How is it deflected, the volitional factor?
The volitions are not sort of driven mechanically,
Okay.
but often they're affected by reflection, by knowledge, by past experience. So somebody likes ice cream, but the doctor has warned them, don't eat ice cream. So then there'll be some reflection on the dangers of eating ice cream. And so even though there'll be a strong urge, that would be the greed or craving for ice cream. But by applying this understanding, then they will exercise restraint.
The question really gets to I was talking to Ron Epstein about this morning, and he described this whole system of explaining consciousness, a theory of consciousness without self, as Buddhism.
Yeah.
But the problem for me in understanding this is when we say someone decides to eat ice cream, someone decides not to, is there not maybe at least an imaginary self that has to make that decision to follow their doctor or not with the ice cream? What determines, what chooses?
One would say that this is a function of these mental factors working together.
So there's no chooser.
There's no substantial metaphysical self behind this.
Right.
But it's the way the different citas flow from one series to another, and the way the different mental factors or chaitasikas interact with each other.
Good.
That is what determines the choice, the preferences and choices.
Okay, good.
Okay, I think it's 5:30, and so we should end for the day. And again, if you have questions that you think of, you can write them down and then give them to me on Wednesday. We have the verses for recite. Okay, so we share the merits with the Dharma protecting deities, the Nagas or dragon spirits, then the Bhutas, fierce spirits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Patacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavag Upadaya Avicci Hetato Etantare Satakai Upapanna Rupiya Rupicha Asanya Sanino Dukkha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting